Welcome to the talk here for the Lunch and Learn on nurturing a culture that improves cybersecurity in your organizations. I wanted to start off and just say thanks for coming out. It's a big crowd. Even though I do this quite frequently, the nervousness about speaking in front of a crowd never goes away, and especially when you're all here. I know you're all very smart on cybersecurity, and so hopefully I can provide some wisdom for you all on this topic. Whether you showed up for the lunch or for the talk, hopefully you benefit either way. So first of all, you came out to this talk. You're going to listen to me speak, whether you did come out for the lunch or not. So who am I, right? What are my bona fides? Well, I probably took the most direct path into cybersecurity. I majored in philosophy and sociology and anthropology in college. Got those 2 degrees. Immediately, almost went into some IT projects at work. And the rest is history, as they say. So at this point, I've been in the IT and cybersecurity field for about 25 years. I did later go back and get my master's in information assurance. And, I've kind of worked across all the different facets of cybersecurity, whether it's, writing policy, doing, security authorization processes, doing control assessments. I've been lead engineer at a large department SOC, responsible for monitoring 300,000 endpoints. I've done some pen testing. If anybody's curious, that's the thing that I have the least skill in. So, I know there's probably people in the room that are way better at that than I am. But at my heart, I'm an engineer. That's the thing that I like to do the most. And I really kind of apply that term broadly, whether it's engineering in terms of implementing tools, writing code, or, re-architecting processes and procedures. 15 years ago, I got the opportunity to co-found a company called MindPoint Group with a couple of partners. And in the last 15 years, we've done a lot of work across the federal government, some in the commercial space, and just sort of proud of what we've done in that regard. As a news item, we were recently acquired by a company called Athene. So just a note there. But I lead all of the marketing, sales, and delivery of all the services that we provide to customers. Why are we here? We're here because our profession has a problem with burnout. There's a mental health issue with cybersecurity, and we need to try to make changes. And so at this level, whatever that might be, if you're leading a team of 5 people within a bigger team, if you're the CISO at an organization, at some level, you've got some leadership responsibility either available to you or, really that you are responsible for. And so I'm making the assumption that because you came to this talk, you're interested in learning more about, these issues and how to build a culture that fosters, better cybersecurity performance in your organizations. And as a little bit of a read ahead, so obviously mental health, burnout, and especially in the cybersecurity profession, it's a pretty broad topic. There will be a pretty specific track I take as we go through this. So I'm not trying to kind of cover everything at a high level, but really focus on a couple of key things. So what do we mean when we talk about burnout? Well, in 2001, there were some psychologists that published some research on burnout and really broke it down into 2 sort of competing components, right? There's demands, which probably has a built-in meaning for a lot of us in terms of sort of someone asking for something, requiring something of us. I would just take a little bit more of a broad understanding of it in the terms of this study. So they looked at the challenging work conditions. That could be, if you work in a warehouse and you're worried about boxes falling on you and crippling you or, killing you, that is a demand. It's something that draws down on your, mental, emotional health. It's an issue that you have to deal with, an anxiety you've got lingering in the back of your mind on a continual basis as you're working. So it's those types of things that fall into the demand category. So For a lot of us in the cybersecurity field, or really more broadly the IT field, there's a lot of repetitive tasks that have to be carried out, those sorts of things. That high workload of that type of tasking, that's going to be a contributing factor on the demand side. There's also, I think, probably a lot to go into in terms of like the emotionally challenging scenarios. That's a sort of broad, nebulous term. But when you are tasked with making decisions continually, where you're concerned about, a breach happening, right? If I miss an alert, if I make a bad decision about, allowing this vendor to, have a relationship with our organization, what have you, and that's potentially going to lead to a breach and other consequences, that's a lot of pressure on that decision or those sets of decisions. And so those types of emotionally challenging scenarios can also contribute to the demand side of the equation here. In terms of resources, again, a little bit of a different perspective on what that means. But it's really all the positive aspects of the job. So it could be something as basic and fundamental as like, do I feel secure in my job, the pay that I'm getting, those types of things. But at a more sort of, detailed level, it can also be how much autonomy do I feel like I have over the work that I'm doing, right? Do I have some sort of ownership in terms of, owning the outcomes and also owning like, how do we carry out the work? But those things can empower people. They can make them feel good about the work. Task variation is also important. If you're just doing the same thing over and over again, I know when I was much younger, we started hearing all the news about, people that were working in highly repetitive environments, going postal was the term at the time. But there is something psychological about that repetition. The human brain is not really designed to just constantly be barraged by, the same thing over and over again with very little variation in the task. So that type of thing can influence, your view of your job, how you feel about it, burnout overall in a positive way. And the one note I would just add here, other studies on burnout have shown that high workload in and of itself is not actually one of the top contributing factors to burnout, right? So you could have a job where you have a large workload, you're committed to the job. Maybe you're in, you're working in an ER, you're a first responder, you're in the fire department, police, that kind of thing. And your dedication to the mission and to the, in those cases, probably highly varied tasks that you're, responsible for on a day-to-day basis, hour by hour, they can be a situation where your workload is actually quite high, but you don't feel burned out. So taking that just as a note there, that it's not the high workload itself that's the problem, it's the type of work that you're doing in that environment. So taking this two-dimensional model and laying it out in this graphical form. So Forrester did a study that was published just like 2 or 3 months ago that they titled The Cybersecurity Firefighter's Guide to Controlling Burnout. And so you can see here on, and I'll get it backwards, I apologize, but on the left side, you've got resources there, and then across the bottom, you've got demand. So it's just, low to high for both of those. And so they did a survey, and this is just people in the cybersecurity field. So all of you, or people like you, 15% of people were what they called champions. So these are people that are highly engaged, resources are high, demands are low, 15%. 59% going, clockwise, 59% were in the sort of burnout and engagement combination category. They called them tired rock stars. So these are people that are probably feeling highly dedicated to the mission, to the field that they're in, probably like a lot of you, like myself, but they are dealing with some of the, the high demands to go along with that, right? Repetitive tasking or feeling like there's a lack of control or, what have you. And so they have that mix, that combination of things from a, this burnout model from this psychological study that was released. And so they're in that bucket. And then moving down to the bottom right there, You can see for burnout, 19% of the workforce or the respondents that replied to this study are burned out already. So, they're red zoners. They have already reached their mental, emotional, physical limits with regards to the work that they're doing, right? They're the ones that are probably in the most, serious condition from this burnout perspective. And then all the way to the bottom left, apathy, people that are, I sort of changed the name that Forrester gave this because I think quiet quitter probably fits the model here, right? These are people that have sort of self-regulated their job to have low demands by just doing the bare minimum job, right? The bare minimum work required to remain employed or to remain in the role that they're in. So they've sort of like, taken care of that workload issue themselves, but they're completely apathetic to the team, the job, whatever it is. So we'll have a little bit of a glass half full, glass half empty situation here. You can look across the top and say, well, 74% of people are somewhere up at the top, right? They're engaged, they care about the work that they're doing, they're trying their best, right? And I think that's absolutely true. But you're here today because we care about the fact that 60% of the respondents are in the top right. So are they going to move to the left and they're going to be more in the champions bucket? Or are they not going to get enough help and they're going to slip down and become burned out? They're a big risk, right? Both in terms of the size of the population and the fact that they're basically very close to their limit. They haven't quite gotten there yet, but they're very close. So just something to keep in mind there. So again, like how prevalent is the problem? This is a little, quick snippet from a study that was released by Tynes called The State of Mental Health and Cybersecurity. This is from 2 years ago. I don't know how much the results would really change, but there's 2 questions that I pulled out of this study, and I want people to just really focus on the wording of the questions and the responses that came in. So on the left side, how often have you felt that you were unable to control the important tasks or projects at work, right? Some of your work is probably like not that important. Some of it is. And so who's answering this question about the important work and saying that they feel like they are unable to control those tasks, those projects? There's like a level of like hopelessness there in that question. And 44% of people said that very often or fairly often, they felt like they lacked control, right? On the left, on the right side there, how often have you felt that difficulties were piling up so high that you could not overcome them? I'm sure everybody in this room at some point, whether it was in your job or in personal life, whatever, you felt like there was a lot happening and you were having trouble keeping your head above water. But hopefully you felt like you were like there was a light at the end of the tunnel. There was some hope in the future that you would again be able to sort of like power through the short-term surge of workload or whatever it was, there's hardships in your personal life, and you'd get through that. This is how many people have lost hope that they can keep their head above water, that they will reemerge and get a breath of air. And again, 43% of people said that in the last month, very or fairly often, they felt like there was essentially no hope. There's a lot of desperation built into this. And a couple of other questions that were in this survey, by the way, dealt with how many people are using medication not prescribed by a doctor 1 or more times a week? Close to 40%. How many people are having 4 or more drinks 1 or more times a week? Close to 40%. So it is a extremely serious and very widespread problem. But to bring it, the sort of personal effects of it to team or personal job performance, right? Again, psychologists are super helpful. They've broken the effects down into 2 areas: attitudinal fatigue and cognitive fatigue. And hopefully here we don't have to be creative and sort of thinking what the definition of these are. They're pretty straightforward, right? Do you have a fatigue of your attitude towards your job? Do you have apathy towards your job, right? Those people will tend to not follow policies and procedures, which probably should concern all of us. And they're not going to be, going out of their way to be good team players, to help their teammates, that kind of thing. They're just, they've reached their limit and they have this, fatigue of attitude that impacts the work that they do. On the cognitive fatigue side, again, they're doing something on a repetitive basis. They're like constantly involved in reactive decision making, and they're just exhausted from it, right? There's a whole separate set of studies that I encourage people to look at about decision fatigue, right? Everything from, what clothes you're going to wear in the morning to what posts on social media you're going to like or respond to or read the article that someone posted or whatever it is. All these tiny little decisions over the course of time build up and wear people out to the point that when they have a big important decision to make, they've already exhausted themselves. There's actually one thing I found along the way here was one of the reasons Steve Jobs wore the same black turtleneck all the time was to just remove the decision. You didn't have to think about it. Just wear the same shirt every day, or not the same shirt, but same kind of shirt. But the effect is it lowers people's ability to make effective decisions, and they're slower making decisions, and they end up taking shortcuts as a result. So obviously there's, a host of problems that are, caused in terms of just job performance that are the result of burnout. So it erodes, personal performance. Nobody here is working by themselves, I'm sure. You rely on other people, so it's going to erode team performance overall. And people who are burned out are going to be more likely to go look for something, right? Again, they are in a desperate situation. They're going to look for any possibility that the situation is going to improve. They're probably going to leave. Then that turns into more work for the people that are still there. So now we have to worry about the people on that chart that were, the champions or burned out and engaged. That's going to impact them in a negative way. So overall, it's a cybersecurity problem. It's a people problem, but it's a cybersecurity problem as well. It increases risk. So what can we do? Well, some of these will sound a little bit, interesting when I just say them outright, but, remove choices. People are getting, fatigued by decisions. I'm sure every single person in this room has probably heard of the term alert fatigue. That's kind of what I'm talking about, right? There's psychological studies about that. It's not just a thing that the cybersecurity folks in the room talk about. It's like, it's a real thing, right? So the degree to which people are looking at alerts, they're false positives, they need tuning and that sort of thing, that's contributing to the problem. And there's things that we could do to make improvements there, right? But remove some of those choices, encourage people to delegate, create structures within your team where decisions are delegated. And really on the flip side, engage people more in decisions that feel more important to them, right? Nobody wants to be making decisions about, the 372nd time they've seen an alert in the last 2 hours, and they know it's a false positive, but they probably do want to have some say in like bigger picture items for the organization. Like, what are we going to be doing over the next 6 months to make improvements to the way we operate, right? So that sort of blend, that mix of things can be important to help people, make improvements in terms of their mental health and the effects of burnout within your teams. And then, the other thing is just giving people more autonomy over the work that they're doing, right? The degree to which you can sort of push some decision making about how we do things down to, smaller team level, and then give them more control over, here's the outcomes we need. How do we get there? And they can help, decide that. That's going to, again, improve things. But there's also the promise of a lot of technologies and how technologies like generative AI, machine learning, SOAR, automating security control assessments, all these types of things can help improve the situation, automate some things to remove the menial, trivial choices that, assign those things to machines. They're good at that sort of stuff, right? So the key thing here is how do we make sure that that's done in a way that is beneficial to the organization overall, right? Common problem is these things should help, but again, we're quick to recognize that there's a benefit in there, but we're also in a situation where people are feeling fairly desperate. They need some light at the end of the tunnel, and it's kind of creates the perfect storm for product marketing teams. And so they're out pushing like, well, if we can slap a AI ML label on this thing that we've been selling for the last 10 years, guess what? We can charge people 20% more for it. So I want to take a quick second to explain the Gartner hype cycle for those that aren't aware of it. And actually, let me get a show of hands. Does anybody know what the hype cycle is? Okay, a couple of people. I think this is actually my favorite thing from Gartner, way more than the Magic Quadrant. I mean, that's useful, but there's a level of like humor that they've built in here, which you can see from the titles of the phases of the hype cycle. But really, the point of it is for all of us to understand that as new technologies emerge, there is a traditional cycle that things go through, right? There's a new discovery. Everybody's like excited about it. And then you get the product marketing teams involved, and they're like, this thing is, generative AI for cybersecurity. It's going to cure cancer. It's going to make your coffee taste better. It's going to wash your car for you, and you reach this peak of just like the expectations about the technology have surpassed reality, right? Well, on the other side of that, you go down the other side of the roller coaster into the trough of disillusionment, right? We're like, oh my God, I'm so sick of hearing about generative AI for cybersecurity. It's been nothing but problems. We've spent $10 million on it. We've gotten nothing out of it. And then from there, that's when, it's been, sometimes months, sometimes years. And finally, you get to the slope of enlightenment. That's where there's more well-baked methodologies, there's tools and different things to help make implementing these technologies actually bear fruit. And you eventually reach the plateau of productivity. So the key thing here is there's, some basically, accurate representation of how new technology enters the marketplace, how it gets applied, and to some degree, some of the pain and suffering we all go through in implementing it. But my recommendation here is not that you wait for everything to reach the plateau or even the slope of enlightenment before you start adopting stuff, right? By that point, and I'll give you a sneak peek of the next slide, just implementing a SIM is on the slope of enlightenment. If anybody here would suggest that just starting to implement a SIM now is a good idea, like it would be absurd, right? Like nobody would ever say that. Nobody in this room would say this. So yeah, waiting until it's sort of like fully baked is not the point. The point is to understand that there's risk involved with making these investments, and you need to know that going in, because otherwise it becomes just another thing that the team has to be responsible for, right? It actually sort of adds to the demand side of the equation in terms of burnout. Like, great, we got this new technology. I haven't bought into all the hype, so I think this is just going to be extra stuff for me to deal with. Creates more of a problem, right? This is the 2023 Security Operations Center hype cycle from Gartner, and there's a couple things to make note of. So first of all, we've got SOAR down in the trough of disillusionment. We got automated security control assessments, hasn't even reached the peak of inflated expectations yet. And generative AI for cybersecurity is way down at the bottom. There's one other important piece of information to note. Those dots are different colors, right? We got white, light blue, dark blue. That's for a reason as well. So Gartner has their estimate of when these things will reach the plateau of productivity. All the three that I highlighted there are dark blue. That's 5 to 10 years away from finally reaching that plateau, right? And again, we're not saying to wait till then. We're just saying when we adopt these, this is all new stuff. So we're not going to get like a great, guiding hand from vendors or from even industry. There's not going to be enough material produced in terms of like lessons learned and that sort of thing in terms of being able to really make the most of these things immediately. So just keep that in mind, as you're kind of like looking at this stuff. But this is a positive talk, I promise. This is not a give up, go home, go down to the apathy part of the quadrant. That's not what this is about. The problem is that too often, and especially when technologies are new and there is hype around them, the technology ends up leading the implementation, right? So in terms of, solving this people problem, because that's what burnout is. It's a problem that people have, and we want to solve it for them because we want to get a better performing organization or better performing cybersecurity function for our organizations overall. We need to take a person-centric approach to it. So that's the key, point here, right? So we should be asking ourselves questions when we're looking at adopting technologies that do have some viable promise to help. But we should be asking ourselves, like, well, what are the things that my people should stop doing, right? If I want to lower that high workload of repetitive tasks, what are those things, right? And that shouldn't be coming from a vendor because they're not here. They're not part of our team. They don't know, right? Also, what are the things I want them to start doing instead? We want them to be more engaged in bigger picture, more important decision-making. What is all that stuff? Let's say we implement the technology. It takes off 20% of their workload. We're not telling them to take naps in the afternoon. There's still plenty of stuff to do. So what is that other stuff that they should be doing? And then also just how do you get them involved in that decision-making and roadmap for, we're going to implement this, how is it going to make everybody here better at their jobs, right? That should be, putting them at the center of that is going to make them feel empowered. They're going to feel like they own the outcomes associated with it, and it's going to be engaging, right? That's going to be actually serve as a resource on that side of the burnout equation. And if you want just a simple sort of like mantra, if you will, in terms of this, subordinate the technology to the people, right? Make sure the technology is in support of the people. It is there to benefit them, and it's not the thing that's most important. I just wanted to kind of like go one level deeper on what I mean by that. So in terms of putting the people first, anybody here working on like a SOAR implementation or has done any kind of like evaluation of SOAR platforms? I'm sure it's probably most of the hands in this room. What is the, to play Family Feud for a little bit, what are some of the top use cases that the vendors talk to you about with regards to, implementing their product or their platform? Does automating submissions to a spam mailbox register for anybody? Automating phishing emails, processing those through malware scanning, that sort of thing. From having dealt with a lot of these, that's probably number one. There's also a lot around, how do you prioritize alerts and triage, right? So, there's a set of use cases they have because they need to. They want you to see the value in it. They have to sort of show you the way to, what could you possibly do with this thing, right? And sometimes those are great ideas. But when we let that be the sort of driving force in terms of what the use cases that we're actually going to implement are, we're going to get something that the technology vendor cares about and not something that's going to benefit the team. So two things that I think are helpful for me when I'm looking at this sort of thing are, what are all the processes that the team carries out, right? And, of those, which ones are going to have the most impact on the organization in a positive sense if they're automated? And it could be, it improves the efficacy of the outcomes, right? If you have worked in a SOC and you're an analyst and you have processed a foreign travel request and something got messed up in the dates or the name or the device or anything else, to be able to put them on the allow list for the week that they're going to be out of the country with their corporate or agency device, you might have someone in a pretty high-ranking position like yelling and screaming to someone many layers up from you about why they couldn't access the agency or corporate network while they were out of the country. That doesn't feel good to anybody. That's on the demand side, right? In terms of the burnout equation. So can we remove that? And in the process, if that's happening 10 times a week, it takes a half an hour for people to take those PDF forms, type them up into SIM rules that allow the traffic to occur without those people getting blocked. And it saves 30 minutes per, submission. So that's 5 hours a week. That might be better than time invested in the spam mailbox, which might only save 2 hours a week, right? So being able to sort of like rank things that way. And then the other piece is, what's the difficulty of implementing those things, right? Some of them are going to require integrations with people in HR, other parts of IT, those sorts of things. Those are not always easy to do. And so taking those two things into account, what are the most impactful things that we can tackle, and what are the, from easiest to most difficult things that we can tackle, and kind of using that as a way to rank order what you're going to do first. And that's going to come from the team, not from the technology vendor. So that's what I mean in terms of the real world, sort of like, how do you put the people first? It's really like taking that input, and it's going to, getting that information about what they're doing on a daily basis that, is the most painful and problematic to them, is going to make them feel like someone cares about what it is that they're facing on a day-to-day basis. So those are really important things to help, make those technology implementations actually bear fruit, as opposed to like getting caught up in the hype of, generative AI for cybersecurity. Like that could mean probably 253 different things, right? So like, what does it mean specifically for this group in the GRC team, for the SOC, for, policymakers, looking at it from that perspective. And then, so one last tidbit here, as far as additional resources or reading goes, I've got a couple links on the next slide. Also, like I said, I've been talking to our partners at Taito Athene. We will be publishing some white papers that kind of touch in more detail, more technical details on some of these topics. So, we'll notify you about that. And one thing in particular, so there is some research on burnout and cybersecurity. There's way more clinical studies on burnout for healthcare workers, first responders, emergency rooms. If you're interested in this topic, you might want to look for that stuff, because it's going to be extremely relevant, because frankly, at the end of the day, that's what we're all doing, right? We're, in some regards, people who care about the job we're doing, care about the patients, right? And, we're dealing with whatever comes at us from, similar to an emergency room or first responder perspective. So it's not all of cybersecurity, but it is a portion. So just something to think about there. Here's the resources. We'll give you access to that. And I want to say thank you for all of you for coming and listening. And hopefully this was helpful, informative.